Hi, it's Penny here, and today we're going to be wrapping up all the books that I read in the month of June. I only read 10 things in the month of June, even though that's still actually lots, because I read so many books in May. It feels like only 10 books, and I did actually DNF one of those as well, so maybe only 9 books. And I think they're about half and half as to whether I like them or not. Oh, and as usual, I will be doing this wrap up book battle style, which means I pair up the books and I battle them against each other until we come up with the best book of the month. We're going to start with a 3-book battle though. So we've got Age of War by Michael J. Sullivan up against The Reindeer People by Megan Lindholm, up against Gifted and Talented by Olivie Blake. So firstly, Age of War. I keep reading the books from the series near the start of the month, and so by the time we get to my wrap up, my memory is faulty, especially because I did spend a lot of June being sick, which is why I didn't read quite as much. You might think being sick would mean more reading time, but actually my brain couldn't hack it. So that's possibly why my memory is also crappy. However, this is a really solid fantasy series. Basically, it's set in a world where the humans, there's kind of a lot of humans, but they're kind of pre-civilization in a lot of ways, and they see the elves as these like immortal gods. But then a human kills an elf, or they call them the Frey, and they realize that they aren't gods after all. And there's also a bunch of kind of like elven politics going on, which leads to a war between the humans and the elves, and the dwarves are there as well as some other fantastical creatures sneaking around. So this one, as you can kind of guess from the title, is where we kind of get to the big actual war. Although this is the 3rd in a 6-book series, and I think I read in the author note something along the lines of he was planning for this to be a trilogy, but once he got here he thought, no, there's still a lot more story to tell, and that's how I feel too. If this was the end, I would be kind of unsatisfied. Like, there is a lot in this story that is wrapped up, and there was a fair amount of like emotional satisfaction or emotional destruction in this book. So in some ways it feels like things are wrapped up, but there's also still a lot of questions about what's going on in the world and what's going to happen between the humans and the elves, and kind of within the elven society as well. Even though mostly these books focus on the humans, and we get just enough of the elves to keep that interesting as well. So I don't know what else to say about this. Very solid fantasy series, some emotional gut punches in this one, but I'm very glad that the series is going to be continuing so I can get some more. And I'm reading kind of one a month at the moment. Then we have The Reindeer People by Megan Lindholm. That's a pen name for Robin Hobb, so I will often just say Robin Hobb because I think of these as Robin Hobb books, although they're published earlier, I think, than the Fitz books, I assume. 1988, this says. Oh, and it's just started raining. I don't think you'll be able to hear that, but just in case, if you can. Sorry about that. Anyway, The Reindeer People. So this is a story where we're following this young woman and her son, who is possibly autistic. It's a fantasy story, so there's no labels, but her son definitely has some kind of learning and mental disability, and she's really struggling with how to live their lives. At the beginning, they're living with these particular people, but they're not very happy with it, so they kind of end up leaving and going off on their own. But when they're off on their own, they do eventually meet up with the reindeer people, so these people that herd reindeer. And there's a lot of interpersonal drama, I guess, between this young woman who's also a healer and the people of this new reindeer people. But also the reindeer people probably have a lot of interpersonal drama as well. To be honest, when I think about this book, there is a part where a woman is bashed over the head, breaks her jaw, ends up with a brain injury. And after I read that, the next day, I woke up with a sore jaw and a bump on my head. And so I still kind of feel like victimized by this book, even though it can't possibly have been the book's fault. But maybe, because this is the book, like it's a Robin Hobb book, so it makes you feel what the characters are feeling, and the characters are really struggling. And I think I especially like quite the quite honest depiction, I think, of this woman really struggling with her son and sometimes feeling like he's a burden and struggling with the fact that she feels that, but then also really loving him and working really hard to make their life and to help him like find his own way of living. And just I really like these books. I will say I'm currently reading the sequel. So this is a duology. I'm currently reading the second book and I'm really enjoying that too. I think this is a fairly short book and it doesn't really wrap things up very much at the end. So I was very glad to be able to go into that second book pretty quickly. But if you're wanting a quick Robin Hobb kind of make you feel things kind of read, then even though it says Megan Lindholm, I think this fits the bill. Then we have Gifted and Talented by Olivie Blake. So I have a mixed relationship with Olivie Blake. I don't really think I am the target market for this book. And I almost DNF'd it at the beginning because I was thinking this isn't the kind of book that I like. There isn't really much of a plot. Mostly it's just a story about these toxic kind of messed up people angsting over their lives and struggling to sort themselves out and not entirely succeeding, but maybe sometimes kind of succeeding. And just like that isn't the kind of book I normally like. Like when I'm reading fantasy books, I want there to be a plot. I'm admitting that this doesn't have as much of a plot as I would normally like. However, this does still have a plot. This one, I guess it does, but that's not the focus. So this is a story about these 3 adult siblings and their father is the CEO of this magitech company. You don't really get much of the magic in this story though. So he's the CEO and then he dies and it's really a question of who is going to inherit. But do you know what? That's not really the focus of this book. The focus of this book is more about the fact that all of these children have struggled as a result of their relationship with their father to feel like they're ever worthy of love and happiness. And their father dying has kind of left them with a lot of mixed feelings, as well as they each have disasters in their lives, which maybe would mean that inheriting would be useful. And they also have kind of other relationships that they're dealing with as part of this story as well. I think what really made me enjoy this in the end is just that Olivie Blake has some kind of deep insight into human nature. And so moments of this were really great and some lines from this were really great. I don't think it needed to be 500 pages. I think I would have loved it if it was a lot shorter. But somewhere along the way in this, I became emotionally invested with the characters. And there was even one plotline that made me cry a little bit. So I don't know, not really the kind of book that I would expect to like, but somehow sneakily I did kind of enjoy it. I think people who really will connect maybe to that idea of feeling like you're not worthy of being loved could really like this. And I had a good time with it. So if I am putting these 3 books up against each other, can I do this in a way which will be easier for editing me? Not really. Normally I take one away first. So let's take this one away because even though I did get emotionally invested, it was way too long. It didn't need to be that long. And like, I just wish it had had a bit of a plot, then it could have been amazing. Then between these 2, once again, this one had a better plot. And Michael J. Sullivan does do a really good job of like putting a bunch of things in place and then having them all come to fruition in a very satisfying way. But I have to admit, I'm much more emotionally connected to the characters and the reindeer people. I just loved the way that it managed to make me feel. And I'm not sure that Age of War like ever quite pulled me in to that degree emotionally. So I think for that reason, we're going to pick the reindeer people as the winner of this battle. Then the next battle is going to be between books that to some degree have some amount of like multi-dimensionality to them. Although when I talk about these books, I'm not going to talk about that element because to talk about it too much is spoilers. So we have The Book That Wouldn't Burn by Mark Lawrence up against Chosen Ones by Veronica Roth. The Book That Wouldn't Burn is the 3rd book in the library trilogy that started with, I keep saying The Book That Wouldn't Burn for this, and I mean The Book That Held Her Heart. Anyway, The Book That Held Her Heart is the 3rd book. Our main character, at least in the 1st book, is Lavera, who is this girl who's kind of raised out in the dust in some degree of poverty. And then she finds herself traveling to the city where she ends up becoming a librarian in this like giant endless library that has some kind of like magical elements to it that we slowly learn about. The other main character in the first book is this young boy named Eva, and he and his siblings have lived for a long time in the library because they're basically trapped in this particular room in the library. And of course, as we follow along, these two characters meet and things kind of expand from there. I still think the first book was the most impressive. The way that it introduced this library and some of the twists along the way were just amazing. And I don't think the next two books ever quite did as much. Even though I do think they're still exploring this idea of like the cycles of civilization and the constant like repetitions of the same mistakes that like every civilization seems to make, and this idea that we keep repeating history rather than learning from it. This book especially is really focused on the idea of how information should be shared and how people use information. And I really do think that the themes in this series are so relevant to our world today. And that's why I'm kind of frustrated that I didn't love this. I feel like for a lot of the book, it was just a lot of things happening, but also nothing happening. Like it never felt like anything that was happening was important. Our characters all just felt like they were doing random things until eventually it came together into an ending that was kind of unsatisfactory. I somehow wish this had actually been longer and that it had done more. I just think the magic of this library is too abstract for my preference. I wish there had been kind of some clearer conclusions and some clearer things that the characters were doing. Like the way that things resolved just felt a bit like hocus pocus and then everything was fine. But still, I think the series is really good, even though I'm kind of disappointed with it at the same time. I don't think that makes sense. That's how I feel. Then we have The Chosen Ones by Veronica Roth. So Veronica Roth was the author of Divergent, and this was, I think, supposed to be her first adult fantasy, but to me it still felt a little bit YA, or at least new adult. Because I think, actually, I should tell you first what this is about. So this is about these 5 young people. It just got really bright. It's either raining or super sunny. What is up with that? Anyway, this is about 5 young people who were designated as the chosen ones after there was this prophecy that they were going to be the ones to defeat this dark one that was basically coming in and killing a bunch of people. So they did defeat the dark one, and then now something else is going on and they're kind of being brought back into it. And the problem is that they're still very traumatized from the events that happened in the first place, and so they're not really that keen to be involved. I'm saying that that's the synopsis because that's the synopsis I was saying before I read this. At this point, I'm not sure. I still think it probably is the best way to describe this book, but what I was disappointed in is the first chapter, which I had read before I picked this up as part of my try a chapter tag thing. Look at that sun. Awful. Or beautiful, depending how you look at it. I am too distractible today. The first chapter, we had this particular character, Sloane, who was the main character of the book, and she was very traumatized, like really struggling with PTSD. And because I was going into this expecting an adult fantasy novel, I was really expecting this to focus a lot more on the exploration of trauma. And it does, but in a much more superficial way. And I think that's why, to me, it didn't feel as adult as I was hoping. Even though I know YA and new adult books can explore trauma in a deeper way than this did, but I just think sometimes for the younger audience, things are like you expect things to be treated in a slightly different way. And because I was expecting adult, I really thought this was going to get into that. And instead it kind of gets into more, like it's more plot focused than I was expecting. And didn't I just say earlier that I prefer plot focused books? But this, I was expecting it to explore the trauma, and instead it went into kind of again, quite a muddled plot. And as well, I don't think the way that the plot was kind of introduced to us was that great. The way it was split between different timelines and jumping all over the place. And it's not that I was confused. It was more just that I feel like a lot of the emotional impact of some of the reveals was taken away because you were pretty much told the reveals before the emotional impact of them. So then you were like, well, I already know that, so I'm not really getting the emotional impact I think I'm supposed to be getting. And again, I think I was just quite dissatisfied with the ending of this. So if I am putting these two books up against each other, even though I had disappointments with both of them, I think I will pick this one as the winner of the battle, just because this one as well hit so many important themes, whereas this one I didn't think really hit the themes that well. In fact, thinking back on it, I'm not really even sure what the themes were. Maybe I've just forgotten. But this will be the winner of the battle. Then my next battle is going to be between the non-fantasy books that I read during the month. So we have The Imaginary Lives of James Pōneke by Tina Makareti, up against Home Before Night by J.P. Pomare, up against Trapdoor by J.P. Pomare. You could also call this battle the Maori author battle, because that's what all of these are. So firstly, The Imaginary Lives of James Pōneke. I feel like I need to hide in the shade more. Maybe I'll just have to make editing me put the pictures up, because I think the light shining off these books makes my camera confused about the lighting. So, The Imaginary Lives of James Pōneke. This is like a historical fiction, and I often don't enjoy historical fiction. But I picked this up because of the New Zealand focus. So this is basically a story about this young Maori boy who is adopted by missionaries. It's set kind of mid-1800s, just as New Zealand was being colonized. So this young Maori boy, actually it starts out quite horrific, where he observes his family being murdered, but then he's adopted by missionaries, and eventually he travels all around really trying to find somewhere where he feels safe and where he belongs. But eventually he kind of aligns himself with this artist, and he makes a deal with this artist to go back to London, where he's going to participate in this exhibition that this artist is putting on. And at this point, like, he's heard so much about London, he thinks it's going to be this like shining glory. But of course, 1800s London is all actually smog and soot and not that great, especially compared to like a very lush and early New Zealand. So it's a bit of a shock to him, but he still feels like he's learning a lot, and he's participating in this exhibition. And it definitely looks into the idea of like, is he being taken advantage of in this situation? Because in a lot of ways, he's the one who wanted to be there. But of course, a lot of the people who are approaching him in this exhibition do so with some degree of racism, varying degrees depending on the people he's talking to. But at the same time, he's also just a young man in London exploring the world, trying to make friends. I really loved the first 2/3 of the book. The first third of the book is really just him in New Zealand. The second third is him kind of arriving in London and being part of this exhibition. My problem with the third of the book, I think, is just that it became a little bit too like generic historical fiction. I felt like everything that happened to our main character from then could have been any character. And also it turned into a bit of a tragedy, which I wasn't particularly enjoying. I think some people would enjoy the queer relationships that are being explored. But for me, the ending just kind of got boring. Wasn't really looking at a lot of the same ideas anymore. It felt to me almost like a different book. So love the first 2/3. Not sure about the last third. But I do think if you have kind of any kind of interest in that kind of story, then I definitely think it's worth picking up. It was actually much better written than I was expecting, and I had a really good time with it. Like, some of the descriptions, and especially again in the beginning, were really beautiful, and there were just some parts that were really interesting. So then as well, we have 2 audiobooks that are both by J.P. Pomare. So J.P. Pomare is a thriller writer that I usually really enjoy. I will admit these were not my favorite. It could be that both of these were quite short, like 4 and 5 hour audiobooks. And so really in a thriller, you're just getting very quick setup, twists and thrills. That's it. Also, maybe I made the mistake of reading this and another one of these short audiobooks by J.P. Pomare like all in a row. Anyway, Home Before Night, we're following this young mother, and it's set in COVID times, which at this point is always kind of weird. So basically Melbourne is being put into lockdown, and this woman who seems to be a very anxious mother is bringing up her son, who's like a young adult, kind of early 20s, just started university. So maybe not quite 20 even. Anyway, she's very concerned. Where is he? He needs to come home. There's a lockdown. And then he doesn't come home, and just we're following along with her as she tries to find out what's happened to him. He says he's staying with his girlfriend, and you're never quite sure, like, should you be buying into her anxiety or is she overreacting? The twist was pretty good. I actually should have seen it coming, I think. I think if I hadn't read this when I was sickish, I might have seen it coming. I think if you pay attention at the beginning of this, you'll see it coming. But I still thought it was pretty well done, the twist. And then Trapdoor. Trapdoor's another one where I did see the twist coming because, well, I saw at least some of the twists coming. There's a few, but I think if you've read any thrillers before, or many thrillers before, or watched any of these kind of movies before, you'd probably pick up on it. But this one, basically, we're following, I think, 4 people who wake up in this basement. They're locked in. It's being streamed. They don't know that initially, but I think they work it out along the way. They see that there's a camera. And anytime they're not having the discussion that they're supposed to be having, the basement starts filling with water, and it's like airtight, so the water is rising and rising. And in some ways, it kind of reminded me of Passengers by John Mars. It's a similar thing where each character that's locked in this basement has a bit of a story, and you get to hear each of their stories and see like where maybe the connections might be. I think for this one, the thing that really ruined it for me was the ending. It was just far too cheesy for me and not the kind of thing I enjoy, unfortunately. So probably my least favorite, Trapdoor. So if I'm going to put these 3 books up against each other, look how bright my hand is. If I'm going to put all 3 of these books up against each other, I'm going to pick The Imaginary Lives of James Pōneke because those first 2/3 were just so great. I'm thinking about, could I reread this at some point and then just stop reading it at a certain point? I have to try and work out where would I stop. Anyway, this was great. If you like historical fiction, then I definitely recommend this. And if you don't like historical fiction, but you're a New Zealander, still maybe worth the read. Then lastly, I'm going to do one more battle, but I think, to be honest, neither of these books are actually up for Best Book of the Month, so we'll just do a single battle for these 2. So we have Karen's Prize by Shauna J. Grant up against Big Magic by Elizabeth Gilbert. So Karen's Prize is another one of these Babysitter's Club Little Sister graphic novel adaptations. So these were, well, like the Babysitter's Club books were books that came out in the 80s, my childhood, and I love them. They were my favorite books. I still have like 100 and something of them down on a shelf down there. And I learned so much from them. There was also a spin-off of one of the Babysitter's Little Sisters, and I didn't really get into those as much because they were kind of set for younger children, but I did read a few, and I have been also reading the graphic novel adaptations. They're just fun, nostalgic reads. I'm not sure that the graphic novels quite get the lessons across as well. I think it's harder with such limited word space and like limited page space, but they're still super cute and like probably a good starter for a conversation about some of the lessons. In this one, basically there is a spelling bee and Karen is determined to win, but she's kind of a sore winner, and this is about learning to, like, whether you win or lose, being a nice person, a kind person still. To be honest, the more and more I read of these books, the more I think of Karen as kind of like an unlikable character, which is so mean because she's just a little girl and she's learning, right? It's not her fault that she's somehow like oblivious about other people's feelings. Then as well, I did pick up the audiobook of Big Magic. So this is a book about creativity that I had heard a lot of people talk about before, and I had it on my TBR for a long time. But somewhere along the way, I had thought it was going to be a much more practical, look at this. Look at this light. No good. I had thought it was going to be a much more practical book, like giving you practical tips about how to be creative. And admittedly, I DNF'd this, I think at about 30%, maybe a little bit more, but it just hadn't gotten into anything practical at all. It was spending the whole time basically saying, like, convincing you that you can be creative, that you don't need to hold yourself back, that you are good enough, that you do deserve to be creative. And I just don't think that that's a problem I have with creativity. Like, I don't think I see creativity in a way that would lead me to think about it in that way. And then about a third of the way through, she started talking a lot about God and entitlement and appropriation. I can't remember, but something about the way she was talking about entitlement just was really annoying me. I don't really know what it was, but she just really annoyed me. I got the feeling she was just quite a privileged white woman. Is she white? I bet she is. Yeah, of course she is. And it actually says here, author of Eat, Pray, Love. I should have picked up on that earlier. I just think she came across as very privileged, and I think that's why it didn't have a lot of practical tips, because she probably doesn't have a lot of those practical problems. That's probably not fair to her. But the summary is, I didn't feel like I was getting anything of value out of this, and I was getting annoyed at the way she was talking about things, so I stopped reading it. So in terms of this battle, obviously I'm going to pick Karen's Prize as the winner of the battle, but now we're going to do the final battle for Best Book of the Month, and we're not going to include either of those. So the final battle will be The Reindeer People by Megan Lindholm up against The Book That Wouldn't Burn by Mark Lawrence, up against The Imaginary Lives of James Pōneke. So these three books, I think first, I'm actually going to take away The Book That Held Her Heart. I probably just said that wrong again, did I? I think I did. Anyway, The Book That Held Her Heart, I wanted this to be great, but it was too convoluted, chaos, nothing. Like, the plot just needed a lot of tightening up to really fit a lot better with the themes and to feel like something was happening through this book. I just wish this had been as good as the first book in the series, but unfortunately, no. So that means we've got these two, and again, this one, that last third just really let it down. So that means the best book of the month is The Reindeer People. Oh look, that sun's gone away now. This was just really beautifully written. Megan Lindholm, or Robin Hobb, her writing, the way she describes things is just so great, including the way she describes emotions and the way she really takes you along on these characters' journeys and makes you feel what they're feeling. And I mean, it probably has gotten a little bit of bias because I'm reading the sequel at the moment and also really enjoying that. But I mean, honestly, we shouldn't really be surprised that a Robin Hobb book would be the best book of the month, because I love Robin Hobb. And if you haven't picked up this duology and you like Robin Hobb, I think you're missing out. So that's all the books that I read in the month of June. Let me know if you've read any of these. I would love to chat with you about them down in the comments, or let me know what the best book you read was in the month of June. Do subscribe if you'd like to see more of my bookish videos. Otherwise, thank you so much for watching. I hope that you are doing well, and I will see you next time.